Okay, this presentation was done at our weekly apologetics meeting at The Ohio State University. This presentation was actually done a ways back last year, but needless to say, we didn't quite get it up on our YouTube channel, so we're going to go ahead and do that now. And this is a look at the fine-tuning of the universe argument. Perhaps some of you are familiar with this. It's a common argument that is used in Christian atheist debates or else any discussions about God's existence. It certainly comes up quite a bit. Of course, there's been a slew of books that have been written about this. I don't pretend to have them all on this slide, but if you want to get started, you could start with some of these books right here. And the second one by Brian Greene, I don't believe he is a theist in any way, but still you want to listen to a different angle there. The Privileged Planet is a book that came out a ways back that talks about the fine-tuning argument. Hugh Ross, of course, is a big proponent of the fine-tuning argument in the middle. He's an astrophysicist. You can go to his website at reasonstobelieve.org. Of course, you know, he's provided a lot of answers to objections on his website as well, or Reasons to Believe. The entire staff has, but that's another book. A more current book, or somewhat more current, was A Fortunate Universe, or is A Fortunate Universe by Luke Barnes. He is a physicist as well. A Fortunate Universe, Life in a Finely Tuned Cosmos. That book there. There's certainly a lot of answers to objections in that book as well. Luke is certainly familiar with them. You can look at his YouTube clips as well. He has a lot of lectures and YouTube clips where he responds to objections. Another more recent book is Signpost to God. This one on the far right here. That's not necessarily a book just on the fine-tuning argument, but he is a physicist and talks a lot about physics and how that points to God. And then a book a ways back was Alistair McGrath's book, A Fine-Tuned Universe, The Quest for God in Science and Theology. So some of these books will get you going, and you can look up some of their articles or websites or videos or something. There's more than enough out there to get going on this discussion. Of course, when we talk about the fine-tuning argument, we don't necessarily need the Bible to talk about this because it's part of what we call natural theology. It doesn't depend on special revelation, which is the Bible. The fine-tuning argument is something that's based in physics, and it's something that is observable in the scientific realm. And so, as we know, science only studies the natural world. So we just need to clarify that you don't necessarily need the Bible to talk about the fine-tuning argument. Now, it is true in Romans 1 that Paul says that people should be able to look at the effects in the world and know there is a creator. But even if someone didn't have the Bible, they could know there is a God through possibly looking at the fine-tuning argument. But that's, of course, the part of the debate. As I said, the fine-tuning argument started out in physics journals. Luke Barnes says this, of course. I mean, he has this in his book here. He says the reaction against fine-tuning might stem from the belief that fine-tuning is the invention of a bunch of religious believers who hijack physics to their own ends. This is not the case. The field began in physics journals and remains with physicists. While there's more work to be done, physics has tended to consolidate our understanding of fine-tuning. So anyway, you can get Luke's book there and read more about it, but the point is that this argument started out in physics journals, so that's very important to remember. And I apologize, I meant consolidate. That is my fault. I meant to say consolidate. Okay, now Antony Flew was a proponent of atheism for a long time, and of course he came out with his book in 2004 about why there is a God. He changed his mind going from atheism to some sort of general theism or deism. And one of the things that really got him believing that there was some sort of God or designer was arguments like the fine-tuning of the universe. He admits that in his interview here published in 2004 in this journal. Not that that's a huge issue, because obviously even if someone believes in a creator and they don't have a relationship with Jesus, obviously that's still not the end goal. We want people to obviously go all the way and have a relationship with God through his son Jesus, because that's needed for the forgiveness of sins. But some people made a big deal out of it because he certainly left atheism. He was a very prolific author in atheism and philosopher. So it was a big deal for him to go a little further and get out of that, or leave that behind and become some sort of general theist. So you can read more about that in his book, There Is a God. So let's go ahead and clarify some definitions. These things come up in discussions about the fine-tuning argument, so let's make sure we understand what we're talking about. First of all, when we think of fine-tuning arguments, or talking about the fine-tuning argument, many people are thinking of design arguments. Elliot Sober is not a Christian as well, but he says in his book, The Design Argument, that design arguments for the existence of God begin with observations, but so do other arguments for that conclusion. What is distinctive about design arguments is that they find goal-directedness in nature. The observed facts are said to obtain because God wanted them to. Design arguments fall into two broad categories corresponding to two types of observations. Cosmic design arguments begin with an observation about the whole universe, which is what we're kind of talking about in this clip. Local design arguments start with an observation about planet Earth. So when we're talking about something being designed, we're saying that there is an agent or an intelligent agent with the ability to plan ahead and think with an end goal in mind. Of course, we're all intelligent agents. Humans are intelligent agents. We plan our whole lives out and we plan ahead. Government plans ahead. We can't survive without planning ahead with end goals in mind. That's what we do to be a success in this life. Some of us are better at it than others. Number two, a design is an intentionally produced or exemplified pattern, where a pattern is an abstract structure that resonates, matches, or meshes a certain kinds of ways with mind or cognition, and the structure can be exemplified in an object or an event. So that's something we need to clarify when we're talking about something is design. And then, of course, sometimes some people say that the universe is so complex. Sometimes Christians say this to other people, and sometimes it's a little confusing, or it's not very clear what they mean by complex. They just kind of throw it out there like everything just seems so complex, so there's no way there couldn't be a God. I think what they're trying to say is that, number one, a specific object or event must be the result of a being with the ability to plan ahead and thinks with an end goal of mind, as we just said. And number two, a specific object or event can't be the result of unguided natural processes, or a specific object or event can't be the result of chance or coincidence. So that's just something we need to clarify when we're saying something is so complex to someone else, like the universe just seems like it's so complex. So make sure you understand exactly what you mean when you're talking about that. Now, sometimes in intelligent design discussions, there's this term called specified complexity, and sometimes we're not really sure what that means as well. And so when they're talking about specified complexity, not just complexity, but something specified, if you have a target here painted on a barn, if a bullseye is painted on the barn before the dart's thrown and the thrower hits the bullseye, the result is specified. So this would likely indicate skill instead of just luck, right? And especially if the results are repeated. So the point is it's specified ahead of time, not fabricated after the fact. And so that would mean that when we say like the universe exemplifies specified complexity, we would obviously say that this universe was planned out ahead of time, way ahead of time, with a target, a very clear specified target. And so just make sure you understand that as well when you hear that terminology, what specified complexity is. Now, when we bring up something called the anthropic principle, that comes up with this discussion. That means that the seemingly arbitrary or unrelated constants in physics have one strange thing in common, namely they've all have precisely the values needed for the universe to be capable of producing and supporting life. That's what that means. We talk about the constants. We're talking about the set values that don't change, like gravity or the electromagnetic force. And we say fine-tuning, we're referring to the fact that these constants and quantities in those formulas or laws of nature must fit an extraordinary narrow range to sustain life. Now, what is life? Life refers to anything that can take in food, extract energy from it, grow, adapt to its environment, reproduce. So the universe must be fine-tuned so that life can get going on Earth. Obviously, you can't even have any old kind of planet. The universe has to be set up a certain way for planet Earth to be set up a certain way, and then for life to get going. Now, there are plenty of scientists that actually believe the universe is fine-tuned. Some of them are not even Christian theists. Some of these names right here. I'm not going to go over each one of them. I'll mention a couple of their names as we go forward here, but the point is that it's not really that controversial, at least, whether the universe is fine-tuned or not. The question is, why is it fine-tuned, and what are the ramifications for us? So just remember, there are a lot of physicists who believe the universe is fine-tuned that aren't necessarily Christian theists. So the argument kind of goes like this, as Robin Collins lays out in his some of his work. Robin Collins is another defender of fine-tuning. I'll mention him more in a minute. He says here, the existence of fine-tuning is not improbable under theism. Number two, the existence of fine-tuning is very improbable under the atheistic single universe hypotheses. The conclusion is the existence of fine-tuning is evidence for theism over the atheistic single universe hypothesis. So pretty much what he's saying, if you look at the bottom, is that if God exists, it's of course entirely within his creative capability to create the universe finely tuned as it is. Now, some people would say, well, you're begging the question whether God exists. And of course, most people are biblical theists, believe God exists, therefore, or they think God exists, therefore they would believe a fine-tuned universe is perfectly within his creating capabilities. And of course, it fits with what the Bible already teaches. But some people use a fine-tuning argument, as I said, to establish that there is a God, some sort of generic God, or maybe even it could be a deistic God. That's why we have to go further into history to see if God's spoken through the person of Jesus or somewhere in history to give a fuller revelation of who he is. And so people are correct to say that the fine-tuning argument would not necessarily prove the existence of the biblical God. That's not what it's set out to do. It's simply used to establish that there is a designer that's intelligent, that can plan ahead, that is powerful, and that's about it. You're not going to find out God is moral, merciful, kind, that he judges, that he obviously is a God of love. You're not going to find out those things through studying the fine-tuning argument. It's just a way of establishing there is some sort of designer behind the universe. Now, as I said, you can look at Luke Barnes' blog. He's got plenty of articles and also YouTube clips responding to criticisms about the fine-tuned universe. I know that he definitely knows just about all the objections that have come out, so you can check him out if you want to do that. Or as I said, you can look at Robin Collins' work. He is one of the other proponents of fine-tuning. He's another expert on it. Here is a clip with him answering objections with Joshua Rasmussen. This is online. You can look that up right there. Or you could go to the debate that Collins did with Peter Milliken here. This is online. I believe it was from maybe 6-7 years ago. You can watch it. I think it was on the Unbelievable podcast. But you can definitely look up their work and look at the criticism, look at the debates. So we're not trying to say you have to look at one side. You can certainly hear all sides of the argument. Now, we're also saying at the beginning of the universe, we're talking about fine-tuning, that when the universe came to existence, that this is the amount of matter and energy was present at the beginning of the universe. So the fine-tuning argument asks why these conditions were at such an optimal level to allow for intelligent life to start. So one example of this is the amount of entropy or disorder that initially existed at the inception of the Big Bang expansion. I don't wish to give a presentation on the Big Bang or cosmology. I'm just saying that there is a relationship between the two, between the cosmology and the fine-tuning argument. You can look into that if you want to. Martin Rees is another physicist who believes the universe is fine-tuned. He is not a Christian theist, but he said in his book, Just Six Numbers, it came out a ways back, I think like 1999 or so. He said here, the mathematics required for human life boils down to 6 numbers. These numbers were built into the Big Bang and must have the precise values they possess for our world to be hospitable to humans. And even if the numbers were different, even to the tiniest degree, there would be no stars, no complex life elements, no life. So that's a book he came out with a ways back. You're welcome to read it. Obviously, he's not positing God as the explanation, but he is agreeing the universe is fine-tuned to some capacity. And this is back from 2009, an article in New Scientist magazine. And when they're talking about fine tuning, they say if the expansion of space had overwhelmed the pull of gravity, in the newborn universe, stars, galaxy, and humans would have never been able to form. If, on the other hand, gravity had been much stronger, stars and galaxies might have formed, but they would have quickly collapsed in on themselves and each other. What's more, the gravitational distortion of space-time would have folded up the universe in a big crunch, and our cosmic history would have been over by now. And so that's kind of a overall synopsis of what we're talking about with fine-tuning. So when it comes to the fundamental forces of nature, we're talking about each of these four fundamental forces of nature had to be carefully fine-tuned for life: gravity, electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force. As Stephen Hawking said in his book, The Grand Design, he wrote this before he passed away in 2010. He said here, a change of as little as 0.5% in the strength of the strong nuclear force or 4% in the electric force would destroy either nearly all carbon or all oxygen in every star, and hence the possibility of life as we know it. Change those rules of our universe just a bit and the conditions for our existence disappear. Of course, Hawking believed the universe was fine-tuned as well, even though he was not a Christian theist, as we know. So when it comes to like the galactic habitable zone, we're talking about our place in the Milky Way is just right. If we were closer to the galactic center, we'd be bombarded by dangerous radiation and comets. If we were closer to the edge, the sun would have fewer of the heavy elements needed to form planets. A couple other things, if we were just 2% closer to the sun, our water supply would rapidly evaporate. And if we were just 2% farther away, it would turn to ice. We'd all be living in Siberia. Oxygen is 21% of our atmosphere. If it were 10%, we'd be struggling to breathe as if we were at the top of Mount Everest. If it were over 25%, we might see spontaneous fires starting on a sporadic basis. And when it comes to the Earth's rotation, of course, the Earth rotates at just the right speed to keep us alive. If it's too slow and the temperature differences, if it's too slow and the temperature is different between day and night, would be too extreme and too fast, and the wind speeds would be disastrous. And the Earth's tilt, of course, the Earth's axis tilt is 23.5 degrees. If it were less than 23.5 degrees, parched areas would not get the monsoons they need, and lunar tides would recede, leaving a city like Seattle look more like Siberia. And so what is it that keeps the Earth's tilt so steady? The gravitational pull of the moon, which has to be at the perfect size to have a very specific gravitational force. And so a couple other things, the centrifugal force orbiting from the sun. This means the sun's gravity pulls the Earth towards it. The centrifugal force created by the Earth's orbit pushes the Earth away from the sun. If these two forces weren't perfectly balanced, the Earth would fly off into space and all life would cease. So these are just some of the things that come up as far as talking about the features of fine-tuning and how our universe is set up for life to exist on planet Earth. When it comes to the amount of matter in the universe, there's too little, and stars and galaxies can't form if that matter isn't right. If there's too much matter, the universe would collapse quickly. And so we get in this issue of probability, and when it comes to fine-tuning argument, there's a lot of discussion about probability levels. You know, how do you assign the probability level to the universe turning out the way it did, or how do you assign probability to events? Of course, there's a subjective approach of probability where you might say, well, there's an 80% chance of rain today. I might say that randomly. Or I might say, I think there's a 50% chance that the world's oil reserves will be depleted by the year 2100. Or I think there's a 1% chance that the men's basketball team will end up in the Final Four sometime this decade. Now, people that make these comments sometimes base these numbers off maybe some past experience they had. But the point is that they are definitely, sometimes they can be more subjective. I mean, they could just come out with these random numbers. I mean, you have to ask them, how do they arrive to these numbers, obviously. And then, of course, sometimes we might say there's a probability scale, and we might say, something like this: one day you will die. We may assign like a 1, or you can swim around the world in 30 hours. Of course, 0 probability. Or you win the lottery someday. We might say there's a 0 probability. Or a random selected student will get an A in a certain course. You might give a range of 0.20 to 0.30. It just depends. But the point is that sometimes we just give these probability numbers. We assign things, with either the correct information or we don't, or sometimes it's purely subjective. But when it comes to assigning probabilities, the fine-tuning universe, as Luke Barnes says, he has this in his article here online, you can read it, The Fine-Tuning the Universe for Intelligent Life. He says the problem of assigning probabilities to a large or even infinite number of probabilities can be a thorny one, but is not unique to fine-tuning. The question, what are probabilities, is not as straightforward as one might expect. There's something called finite frequentism, where of all the coin flips that have ever occurred, roughly half of them come up heads. And then there's something called a hypothetical frequentism, where if you flipped an unbiased coin infinite number of times, the fraction of heads would approach a half. And so if you want to read more about how to assign probabilities and the challenges with the fine-tuning argument, you can read Barnes' article. Now, sometimes physicists and others are using Bayes' theorem to assign probabilities. This is kind of popular. There's a subjective side of it and an objective side of it, where the subjective side of using Bayes' theorem is before, like, the coin was flipped, your personal belief was that the coin would land heads and was as strong as your belief that it would land tails. Or a more objective form of the Bayes' theorem argument is that given the information this fair coin has been flipped, the plausibility of the proposition this coin landed heads is equal to that of this coin landed tails. So you get into prior probabilities with Bayes' theorem. There's all kinds of formulas they use, but some of these debates over fine-tuning argument will use Bayes' theorem. So you have to read up on it. You're going to have to know a little bit about Bayes' theorem if you want to learn about it. But if you want to read someone like Robbins Collins' work or others, or some of these other people that debate these things on a philosophical level or scientific level, you're going to see sometimes where Bayes' theorem pops up in their arguments. Now, Frank Tipler, he co-wrote a book with John Barrow called The Anthropic Cosmological Principle. It came out a ways back. It was released in 1998. And he was an atheist. He says here, when I began my career as a cosmologist some 20 years ago, I mean, that was as we saw the date there on that previous book, he says here, when I began my career as a cosmologist some 20 years ago, I was a convinced atheist. I never in my wildest dreams imagined that one day I'd be writing a book purporting to show the central claims of Judeo-Christian theology are in fact true, that these claims are straightforward deductions of the laws of physics as we now understand them. I've been forced in these conclusions by the logic of my own special branch of physics. And so he talked about that in his book, The Physics of Immortality. It came out in 1994. Of course, that was after the book he wrote with Barrow. So that's kind of interesting. Well-known physicist there saying that. And then, as I said, that Hawking did believe that the universe is fine-tuned. Of course, he's passed away, but he said our universe and its laws appear to have a design that is both tailor, made to support us, and if we are to exist, leaves little room for alteration. That is not easily explained and raises the natural question of why it is that way. And of course, as I said, part of the debate is not over whether the universe is fine-tuned. There's only maybe a couple out there, a couple of physicists that believe the universe isn't fine-tuned, but many, many of them do believe the universe is fine-tuned. And then, of course, the question is why it is fine-tuned. Paul Davies, who is more of a deist of some kind, teaches at Arizona State. He's a physicist. He's written a ton of books on science. He says there, scientists are slowly waking up to an inconvenient truth. The universe looks suspiciously like a fix. The issue concerns the very laws of nature themselves for 40 years. Physicists and cosmologists have been quickly collecting examples of all too convenient coincidences and special features in the underlying laws of the universe that seem to be necessary in order for life and hence conscious beings to exist. Change any one of them, the consequences will be lethal. Of course, I already mentioned that he believes the universe is fine-tuned as well. Talks about that in his book, The Goldilocks Dilemma, Why is the Universe Just Right for Life? A guy named Charles Townes, he's a physicist. He says here, intelligent design, as one sees it, from a scientific point of view, seems to be quite real. This is a very special universe. It's remarkable it came out just this way. If the laws of physics weren't just the way they are, we couldn't be here at all. The sun couldn't be here. The laws of gravity, nuclear laws, and magnetic theory, quantum mechanics, and so on have to be just the way we are, just the way they are for us to be here. I maintain that science is closely related to that because science tries to understand how the universe is constructed, why it does what it does, including human life. That is in an article online. You can get there. There's the link. I don't know whether he is a believer or some sort of theist. I don't think so, but I'm not sure. And then Fred Hoyle, of course, the famous quote that he made, he was an atheist. He says here, common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well with chemistry and biology. That there are no blind forces. We're speaking about nature. The numbers one calculates and the facts seem to be so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. And he had said here in his book, or he said a ways back, he'd said for life to exist on Earth, an abundant supply of carbon is needed. Eminent of course, this is what John Lennox is talking about that Fred Hoyle said. John Lennox teaches at Oxford. He says, our eminent mathematician and astronomer Fred Hoyle found that for this to happen, nuclear ground state energy levels have to be fine-tuned with respect to each other. The phenomenon is called resonance. If the variation more than 1% either way, the universe could not sustain life. Hoyle later confessed that nothing had shaken his atheism as much as this discovery. Even this degree of this fine-tuning was enough to persuade him that it looked like as if a super-intellected monkey with physics as well as chemistry and biology. So let's look at some of the explanations for fine-tuning. Some people will punt to necessity. This means that this objection mounts the claim that it's physically impossible for the universe not to be habitable. That means that even if it were that case, it doesn't explain, of course, even if it was the case, it doesn't explain why the laws of nature themselves are finely tuned. They certainly didn't have to be this way. So some people say it's just out of necessity that the universe just has to be that way. It's physically impossible for it to not be that way, but it doesn't really answer the question as to why they are fine-tuned or why the laws of nature are fine-tuned. So that doesn't really answer anything at all. And another common objection is the weak anthropic principle, where it says no explanation is needed for why we observe a life-permitting universe because this is the only kind of universe we observe. If the universe were not life-permitting, then we wouldn't be here to ask about it. So that settles that, and there's no need to give an explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned. We're here to observe it, therefore the case is settled, so we don't need an explanation. And of course, this brings up the question of whether you are in, for example, this picture here where you're stuck against a wall with a blindfold and you're going to get assassinated, or you're going to get murdered or killed or executed by all these men here with their rifles, and somehow they missed. And obviously, the most common question someone would ask is, why the heck am I still alive, and how did you miss me on purpose, or did you miss me on purpose? So I think that the weak anthropic principle is weak itself, a weak argument. So it doesn't answer anything. Of course, we're going to still ask why the universe is fine-tuned. Of course, when it comes to chance, some people say we just got lucky that by chance accident we got the right universe. You have to define chance correctly. In the Merriam-Webster's dictionary, chance is something that happens unpredictably without discernible human intention or observable cause. And the assumed impersonal, purposeless determiner of unaccountable happenings, which is luck. So sometimes chance obviously can refer to mathematical probabilities. Obviously, so you can assign mathematical probabilities to events. It's not that chance did anything, because chance has no power to do anything. It's just that we're the one flipping the coin or flipping the dice. It's just that it turned up 3 dices turned up 6 dices, or 6 sixes, whatever it is. 3 dices turned up 6s. The point is that you really can't posit that chance has any kind of power to do anything, because it doesn't. All it is assigning a mathematical probability. And so when it comes to biblical theism or Christian theism, it's not that God can't use a chance event. As you look at number 4 here, the problem is that where we start getting into chance doing things as if it's has some sort of power to do anything. It really doesn't. So it's not that biblical theism is always against chance. Obviously, some people think God doesn't use chance at all, but God can control a chance event if he wants to. He's not limited by chance. But the point is that that means it doesn't it's not a purposeless event. It means God is behind that chance event. So Christians have different views of chance, but the point is the atheist view or naturalistic view is that chance can pull things off on its own when all you're really doing is assigning a mathematical probability to an event. There's a very good book, or somewhat a book that discusses some of these things. You can get it. You can read the free PDF called Chance and the Sovereignty of God, a God-centered approach to probability and random events. This author here is well known. He's got a lot of his books for free reading. So you can read that online if you want and take a better look at it if you want to study chance and probability, how that applies to probability and random events. Now, sometimes people bring up the poor design. Some people say that the universe has a lot of empty space in it that's hostile to life. Of course, Richard Carrier, who's a atheist, brings this up. You know, he says here, number 2, that if the universe were the size of a house, that area would have life in it, would be smaller than one of the atoms in the house. He says if you walked into the house, would you conclude that it was fine-tuned for life? There is a response to that, and the fact, of course, is that God may have a reason for all this apparently useless space. Now, some physicists have already shown all that space is needed. You can go to the lecture by Michael Strauss on my YouTube clip. He's a physicist. On my YouTube channel, he's a physicist. He talks about this in his lecture at The Ohio State University, that they found a place for this empty space. So if you believe in the evolution of complex life takes billions of years, and unless the universe is expanding during this time, will collapse due to the strength of gravity. So it could be that this wasted space is needed, or supposedly wasted space. Of course, some people point to the multiple universe theory, that there's many universes out there and we got lucky. There's no evidence for any other universes yet. There's obviously, if you had a many multiple universes, it doesn't mean there's not a creator. Where does that universe generator come from? You're multiplying causes beyond necessity, multiple universes versus one supernatural cause. And that doesn't really get rid of the fine-tuning of our own universe at all. You don't know anything about those other universes. Of course, if they're fine-tuned as well, you'd have to ask why. But the point is, there is no observational evidence for any other universes at this point. It's mostly theoretical or speculative. Now, some people would say that, you know, we have found other Earth-like planets and we aren't that special. That's not necessarily true. You can read the article, Why Haven't Scientists Found Earth 2.0 Yet? In this article in Forbes magazine, December 2018. As far as we know, there are no potentially habitable Earth-like worlds out there. Now, people shout that out like there are. We're just, well, they found life on this other planet. It's just like Earth. That's not true. You can get a book called Rare Earth, Why Complex Life is Uncommon in the Universe here. And that brings us to the point of the improbability of the God of the gaps fallacy, where sometimes, you know, there's a gap in our knowledge and God fills in the gap and then provides closure to the mystery of the cosmos or the universe. But then, of course, the skeptic will try to say, well, new information will come in and the gap of our knowledge is closed and your God hypothesis is not needed. There's a problem with that, because the fine-tuning argument goes on what we know. And what we know from science and physics journals is the universe is fine-tuned for life. So it's not the gap is there. The knowledge is there. The question is why it is there. So anyway, if someone's a naturalist and wants to keep saying there's always going to be a naturalistic explanation, then that's, of course, called a nature of the gaps fallacy, or naturalism of the gaps fallacy, just like the God of the gaps fallacy. The nature will fill that gap just like God will. And remember also that when it comes to the fine-tuning argument, when it comes to explanations, scientific explanations only deal with impersonal objects and the laws of nature. And of course, in scientific explanations, you're dealing with naturalistic explanations only, and nothing to do with personal explanations or agent explanations. Because when it comes to personal and agent explanations, which we observe all around us as well, the person makes a choice concerning the future. You have a motive, a will, an intention, and so forth, which carries out the purpose. And of course, if I'm teaching, I'm the person that has a motive and intention and the power to pull it off, and I have a purpose behind it. So as you can see right here, everybody is an agent, and we can account for things around us that are, of course, accounted for by personal agent explanations. And so there's nothing wrong with scientific explanations. We just need to remember there's other kinds of explanations out there. Reality isn't limited to just scientific explanations, because that only deals with impersonal objects and the laws of nature. As I said before, everything around us is begging or showing that there's personal explanations. For example, look at these three things here. And of course, blind and unguided natural processes can think ahead and design a blueprint or collect the proper materials, construct the machinery, then process everything in the right order. That's just common sense. I know people know that, of course. But so when we say that blind, unguided natural processes set up the universe on its own, and that's just the way it is, and there's no better explanation, you can't say God did it. You're basically saying there's no way there could be a personal explanation at all, and so your view of reality is very limited. And of course, as we know, to be successful in life, we have to plan ahead. We plan our education. It's supposed to prepare us for the future, to help us make a living. We plan our health. We set health goals so we can live a long, healthy life. Sometimes we write up wills to plan for retirement, and we plan for retirement. Of course, government has to pass bills that always have a goal, and they must plan ahead for the future, for a society or a culture. So everything is related to planning. Planning is all around us. Planning end goals, setting short-term goals, long-term goals. And so if we apply this principle to fine-tuning argument, we would say, number one, advanced planning is a sign of an intelligent cause. Secondly, the whole universe shows evidence of advanced planning. The conclusion is the whole universe was planned by an intelligent agent, which of course is God. And this is what we're talking about behind the teleological argument. The word teleology comes from telos, which means purpose or goal. The idea is that it takes a purposer to have a purpose. And so where we see things obviously intended for a purpose, we can assume that those things were made for a reason. Now, some people might say the universe has no purpose. The universe is purposeless. Sometimes atheists say that. I've heard that quoted from atheist physicists. We don't have a purpose. The universe has no purpose, and we're just here. Well, the universe would have to have a purpose, because if the universe is not set up correctly for life, then planet Earth is not going to get going, and no life is going to get going on planet Earth. And so it would seem that the universe has to have a purpose of some kind, even if you don't believe God is behind it. And one of the purposes of the universe is so that intelligent agents, or that sentient, self-aware personal creatures, can come into existence, right? Now, of course, to plan ahead, to plan a universe ahead, to get life going on a planet would take quite a bit of planning, and it certainly exceeds anything you or I planned for. It exceeds building a building or planning a culture or planning an education or retirement. It's way, 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 way more advanced than that. So it's fascinating that so many people admit that we see agent and personal explanations around us that required planning, major planning, but then when it comes to the universe, it's not planned out at all. And our planet Earth's not planned out at all. And we just got life going, and we just got lucky. So it's interesting that people actually believe that. You can read about the fine-tuning of planet Earth as well in these books right here, if you want to get more up-to-date on some of those arguments as well. And then we come to the issue of causes, the different kinds of causes in reality that we see. Going back to Aristotle, you have the material cause and efficient cause, the formal cause and the final cause. You see these kinds of causes in everything around you, pretty much. They're self-evident. And so what that means is that when you have the material cause, you have that is out of which something is made. You have a formal cause, which is the design or idea followed in the process of making something. There's some examples on the right-hand side. You have the final cause, the purpose for which something is made. You have the instrumental cause, which is the means or instrument by which something is made. You have the efficient cause, which is the chief agent causing something to be made. And you have the sufficient cause, which is a cause equal to the task of causing anything to be made. So looking at this, and we look at the universe, we would say that the material cause is dark matter, irregular matter, dark energy. The formal cause is the idea of the universe. The efficient cause is the agent behind the universe. And the final cause, or the purpose of the universe, is that planet Earth must be hospitable to life. Of course, we bring up the Fred Hoyle comment again. And so this makes us say this leads us to the point that, remember, modern science doesn't deal with efficient causation. They don't ask the who is behind the universe or who made it. They don't deal with that agent explanation issue. And they don't deal with final causation. They don't talk about end goals or purposes. They don't ask the why question. Science mostly deals with how the universe came together and the function of the universe. It doesn't necessarily deal with any kind of deeper purpose or end goals behind the universe or any kind of efficient causation. And so perhaps we need to realize we need to utilize philosophy as well when we talk about the fine-tuning argument, or we need to think about what science can do and what it can't do. And of course, if you ask if God designed the universe or is responsible for the fine-tuning argument, then someone may say, who designed God? Of course, that would assume that God has parts or composition, or he's put together by something else. And it leads us to ask, how would you know anything about the nature of God, what he is as essence, unless he shows us? And so when it comes to natural theology and revealed theology, we can talk about what God is as nature, and we can discover that God doesn't have parts or physicality. And so asking what caused God is a category mistake. Now, Victor Stenger had a book called The Fallacy of Fine-Tuning, where he said the universe is not fine-tuned. He also debated Hugh Ross, and I think you can see that online. They did a debate. And Luke Barnes, of course, responded to Stenger. You can read Luke Barnes' critique of Victor Stinger's argument. It's on Wintery Night's blog, if you go to that link right there. And there's also Luke's journal article where he talks about it. So there has been a response to Stenger. I know a lot of atheists like to use that book or use that as a apologetic that there is no fine-tuning. It's not that simple. So make sure you read both sides of the argument. So this kind of wraps it up, just an overview of the fine-tuning argument. I hope that it will help you to go deeper and see why that the best explanation for why the universe is the way it is a personal agent who is God. And if you want to know more about that God, you certainly would need to look into history and see if he has spoken through the person of Jesus of Nazareth. Have a good day.